Hi, and a couple of things, not least of which the announcement by Blizzard that they're going to set up like a professional league for Overwatch has got me thinking about what's the future for esports and, in particular, female gamers. So, there was an article in the BBC News on the website, which is a British based media organisation for those overseas, and it really got me thinking about the future of esports, most especially because this sort of led with the idea that on Monday, next Monday, there's going to be an esports industry awards taking place. Obviously, various people nominated for various categories. None of them are women. Now, this is not necessarily to say that there's inherent sexism within the nominations process, but it does get you to think, why would this be? Because I hadn't really considered it before. It's pretty bad, I suppose. Because you think about you think about a lot of sports, and whether it's football or rugby or tennis or just athletics, and you sort of think, well, you have a separate men's category and a separate women's category. And the answer for that is fairly straightforward, because men have certain physical advantages. We can run faster in general. Obviously, the women's world 100-meter record holder would leave me in her dust. But generally speaking, it would be an unfair playing field because faster, higher, stronger sort of thing. When it comes to gaming, though, those physical things are gone. Those physical advantages are totally absent. So, in theory, there is no reason why you shouldn't have men and women both competing at the top level. Now, this particular article does point to some research that says when you sort of interview men and women of whatever age gap, I suppose, when I looked into it, both genders are equally likely to say that they play video games. Although it did note that men are far more likely to identify as gamers. And I suppose the distinction there is, when you think of yourself as a gamer, you think that you don't just play it for a bit of passive fun in the same way you might watch television, that you actually do it competitively. It doesn't have to be at a high level, but you nonetheless do it competitively. Now, of course, we all know that just from an evolutionary point of view, men tend to be, again, on general, more competitive. But there's still plenty of competitive spirit within women. And even if you've got a slight disparity towards men, shouldn't you still have quite a lot of women in gaming? And again, competing at the top, because what the hell's the advantage? And then I sort of thought, well, I look at the demographics for my channel, of course, do a YouTube channel. It's quite niche, and it's specifically for World of Warcraft. And when you look at the gender balance of people who view my content, you can see that only 3% are women. Now, my experience, having played World of Warcraft specifically for like 12 years, whatever, is you can sort of tell it's mostly lads, it's mostly men that are playing it and boys, but there's surely a hell of a lot more than 3% women and girls play it. So, sometimes I've thought to myself, is it something about my channel? Is it something about the specifically niche nature of my channel? Even given that it's niche because it's just on one game, even within that it's fairly niche. Or is it just something about me, or to do with my channel, the way I present it, that doesn't appeal to women so much? I don't know that. But again, you see, or maybe it's just the fact that I tend to do the stuff that people who look at my channel are wanting to sort of improve, and that sort of puts it at a higher level. And maybe you don't get as many. And I don't know, because I've been in different raid guilds, for example, and I've never been in a raid guild where you've had anything like half of them being women. I've been in some raid guilds where none are. And I've been in some where you've had like one or two. And I have been in some where you've probably had 5 or 6. But that's like the most. So it is overwhelmingly like that. And I'm not entirely sure why. Now, what this article was going on to talk about is the fact that women are struggling to make a breakthrough into the top level of esports. And of course, this is something I think that the industry has to get right, because it's an emerging form of sport, a form of competitive activity. And I think you need to get it right to start with, because God knows we've had problems in some sports. In the UK, for example, in football, we have terrible problems with bigotry, racism and homophobia being two of the real big ones. And the problem is countering it when it's ingrained is a real problem. So we have a situation here where we mustn't let things get ingrained. And we know this has been well publicised. When some women do sort of become really competitive, they often get a lot of hate, quite frankly. Very, very personal threats and comments about them just because they're women, which absolutely needs stamping out as much as possible by the industry. But it goes on to talk about, setting up a women's league to go alongside it. And I read that and I was sort of filled with horror at first. And I can understand why they're doing it, because if they're struggling to get women to make a breakthrough competing with men at the same level, they need something to try and encourage more women to play, and doing a separate league alongside it. I think the problem is, like with any sport that's traditionally played by men, and then when you try to grow a women's game, you initially will struggle to find sponsorship and awareness. That's a common struggle for any sport. But in a lot of physical sports, you can understand, well, there needs to be a separate men's and women's thing. But there are some sports, just to go off on a tangent, again, people outside of the UK may not be too familiar with this sport. Sport of snooker is also one I've enjoyed when I was younger. And there was an article, coincidentally, recently, about a black player. There are almost no professional black snooker players. There's like 2, I think, literally 2. It's not a huge sport. In the UK, it's a reasonable sized sport, and it's quite big in China, and there's a few parts of Asia. If you're in the US, you may never even heard it. It's like a more complicated version of pool. It's much more complicated, actually, and on a table 4 times the size, but it's a cue game. And this guy is basically saying that that World Snooker doesn't do enough to promote black players. And World Snooker countered that it's totally open, and there's no racism, there's no barriers to anyone getting into it. Now, they're actually both right, and I could link this to esports. Just as there's no barriers to women getting into esports, there's like no barriers to black players getting into snooker. But it could be argued that a young black kid growing up in the UK watching different sports isn't going to identify as strongly with snooker because they just see white fellas play or Asians play it all the time. It's predominantly white British or Chinese people in the televised stages of it. So it could well be saying, well, where's your role model if you're identifying with race, which a lot of people unfortunately do. So you're much more likely, are you not, to identify with people who play the sports where you can sort of recognise, oh, yeah, I'm from that sort of background. If I think about it, we have the same thing really in cricket, don't we, in England cricket? We have very few black players in England cricket. It's mostly white British and British Asian players. And I don't know whether there's the same sort of thing in America. I know in America it's a much more diverse population, really. There's a much higher proportion of ethnic minorities, as you might call them in America, ultimately to the point where I'm not even sure how much of a minority it actually is. And then other countries, I'm not so sure. But it just worries me to have this separate women's league. I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. You could sort of say it's a good thing, because if it does encourage more women to play, it's sort of that. But the problem is, as soon as you set up an open league, which anyone can play in, but then a women's league, it almost looks like the other league is not an open league, but a men's league. And because the other league, the women's league, might continue for some time to struggle to get sponsorship, to struggle to get awareness, that it's not really going to be hugely aspirational for female gamers. I think what needs to happen is we need more female gamers on the big stage. So then you have to think to yourself, so why are there not more? Okay, there is a sort of level of abuse there, but if there's just as many women play games as men, or if that's even possibly a thing, or even if it's close to that. Is it something about the games itself? Now, go back to sports where there's a physical advantage. Okay, so we sort of know there's an evolutionary benefit in men having been faster, more muscly, more stronger, all the rest of it. Because we've, traditionally in caveman days, we were the ones who went out and hunted the mammoths and ran away from the saber-toothed tigers. But the brain's wired differently as well. And apparently men have better spatial awareness. So is it the type of games? Is it just that esports focuses on a particular genre of games? And maybe there are other games that women would be better at that would be just as compelling to watch. Because this is the thing, you see. It doesn't matter. You might have certain types of games where women might enjoy them more than men, and maybe you'd get more women playing those. It doesn't necessarily make it any less compelling to watch, because there's some sports that I like watching, but when I've tried playing them, don't like it. Like, I quite like watching tennis. I've never enjoyed playing it. I've tried playing it a few times. Can't be doing with it. I can't even see the line over the net when I'm serving the ball. I'm just guessing. Terrible game. There are some games I really like playing, but I don't like watching. Like, when I was younger, I was really into judo, loved going to tournaments. Not that keen on watching it. It's not that fun. I can understand people who don't even understand judo trying to watch it. They're just going, it's two fellas just holding hands. I can understand why they don't get it. Even I, who used to be a judoka and understood what was going on. It's not really a great spectator sport. I can't even think of words today. Sorry. And so it's the same thing here. So there might be a game that's sort of more tailored towards the skills that women would be better at, that I might not enjoy as much, because I'm not as good at it, but I might actually still enjoy watching it. I mean, give you another example from esports, like when you see like Heart of the Swarm 2 things. I usually watch when it's on BlizzCon. I quite like watching that. That's all right. It's quite fun. Don't like playing it. Played it, didn't like it. Not my sort of thing. All right to watch though. Just like World of Warcraft, I quite like playing World of Warcraft, especially in PvE raiding. Don't really enjoy watching people doing it though. So I don't really watch people streaming it, because I like doing it as a participation thing, not as a spectator thing. So, and then you think to yourself, okay, but it sounds artificial now at this point. What we're doing is, for the sake of equality, trying to come up with games just to have as many female gamers as male gamers, even if there's an imbalance in the different types of games. I don't see it that way, because in actual fact, surely if there's this huge potential for female gamers, because just as many women identify as playing video games as men, according to surveys, then surely there's a huge market out there to produce some different types of games. Some games that you can play competitively that actually are better suited for female gamers, if indeed there is a difference at all in terms of aptitude. But I mean, I just thought I'd throw it out there. It's sort of a bit open-ended, this one, but I don't know what you think as well. I know I have some female gamers that watch the channel. Unfortunately, not enough. But what do you think? Is it something about the types of games that are played, or is it something about the perceived level of hostility to female gamers when they do become very competitive? Or is it just a lack of role models? Are we already getting into a very dangerous quagmire of seeing esports as traditionally going to be done by male gamers? And as I say, this is the early stages of esports. I just fear that when we get 10 years down the line, these things will become more ingrained, and it'll be much more difficult then to break through those barriers which shouldn't be there in the first place. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Obviously, put comments below. Hopefully there'll be quite a lot of them, get some discussion going. And if you've enjoyed watching the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. And until next time, I'll see you later.